Oh, well, he enlisted shortly after the war broke out in 1914. He was designated, I think from the start, they designated him as a driver. Physically, he was not wounded or injured. Again, my mother said that he did show signs later on of the effects that they had, whatever it was, from having been where gas was about. He was on a ship just outside Fremantle on 3 months' furlough. But he was outside Fremantle when the armistice was signed. And then I'm not sure when Kentucky came up. From my mother's tape, that when she spoke of it, the government had actually been preparing to do something for the diggers when they came back, and they had in various parts of Australia set aside blocks of land, and the returned soldiers, if they wanted, could apparently take up one of these blocks. The house was provided along with the block, and my mother describes it had apparently it was I've got pictures there, but it's a wooden building. It was lined in pine. There was a living room, 2 bedrooms, a little kitchen, a little bathroom, a little tiny veranda at the front, and a little porch at the back, and 1 tank, water tank, holding 1,000 gallons of water, all provided by the soldier settlement people. He had been on a farm, and he'd been on a dairy farm, but I don't think he had farming experience. But all the diggers were taken, before they got on their block, they were taken to a place called Wallengrove, which is out of Glen Innes, and there was a government facility there, and the diggers, ex-diggers, were given between 3 and 6 months training there on how to graft plants and how to grow seedlings and all that sort of stuff, and then they were sent to their farm. The climate must have been suitable for apples, pears and cherries, and they went there to plant. They all had apples, pears and cherries all over the settlement, and my mother said that before that they knew at the start that it would be 5 or 6 years before they were getting crops. So in the early years they planted potatoes and turnips and other crops like that, I suppose to try and get some income, and they were partly subsidised by government funds. They had some bad times, and I think my father got a bit upset by that and decided he'd move elsewhere.
Well, the first block was 150 acres, a very small block, near Leeton, and that was he said, the average size for an irrigated farm at that time, obviously absolutely inadequate. But after 7 months he transferred to a second farm at Niamba, which was 251 acres, and built a rather primitive house on that. Then he married my mother, and then they both lived there in very primitive conditions. The Niamba farm, being only 250, wasn't large enough, and so he got additional areas. So the total farm area was 944 acres, but parts of that were flooded by water from the neighbouring farms, because this is an irrigated area, and some areas became swamps. My father said that after wasting a lot of money on that farm, he transferred to a new farm near Griffith, and that's where I grew up. That was when I was just 5 years old, in 1937. Well, I certainly remember dry periods weather-wise, but we didn't suffer from lack of water because in summertime there was always the irrigation, and the rain tended to fall in the winter. I think there's probably 12 inches of rain a year. It was mostly flat country with occasional hills here and there and a bit of granite outcropping. Yes, there were many major issues. Well, snakes, of course, was another problem. Transport was another problem. Getting to schools was difficult. Money was always a problem. But his main complaint was that the farm at Griffith, which was 540 acres of mostly irrigated land, he felt was still not enough to bring up a family. He did write lots and lots of letters to politicians and trying to get more land, and I think at one stage he was granted some land but found it wasn't in a satisfactory position. I thought the Griffith farm might have cost £2,000 because many, many years later he was shocked to find he hadn't paid it all off and still owed a small amount of money on it. We did almost nothing else at home except jobs. We didn't go to sporting fixtures, we didn't go to church, we went to school. Some of these jobs were very menial. For example, I remember spending time taking a cut lunch down to a stack of wheat bags and sitting on that stack for hours and hours to stop the galahs eating into the eating into the wheat bags and causing the stack to collapse. So that would be hours and hours spent, and labour was cheap. It just required a few sandwiches. We had a parents' bedroom, one guest room, and one combined boy and girl bedroom, which was used mostly for cupboards and clothing. If you were sick, seriously ill, you would be taken into one of the bedrooms where there wasn't that much space, but generally most of us slept most of the time on the veranda. None of them finished high school, and I was the only one who finished high school of the lot, and it was mainly because of the difficulties of travel and so on. Well, I think anger in these situations is a number of things. It wasn't all the time, but I think it would be at times when he would find lack of money was restricting his activities or restricting things he could do or do for the family. And so he was frequently angry, but it wasn't all the time. He was a rather nervy man, and he really wasn't very relaxed with horses. The rest of the family were quite happy with horses, but he always tended to be a bit nervous about horses. Well, I think the house was actually a very good house for the sort of thing it was designed for. It was reasonably cheaply built, and I have an idea it was built in 8 days. I certainly have a receipt for £350, which I believe is the total cost of the house. In the early years, it was miserable. We weren't a religious family, and I often used to think, if we're not doing this for the grace of God, why are we doing it?